What's up guys, it's Amanda and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be an art supply review and I'm going to be reviewing a set of markers that I recently bought online. Now just a quick note, if you guys are new here, I primarily work with Copic markers, which are a dual-ended alcohol-based marker that you can buy from many retailers, from Hobby Lobby to Michael's to online stores as well. One notable thing about Copic markers is that they are expensive, and I hear this a lot, and I know that there are a lot of you out there that have been searching for alternatives to Copic markers. Now, I can't guarantee that this video is going to answer that demand, just because there are a lot of differences between different marker brands, and a lot of things that I like about Copic just can't be found in other marker brands. However, that's not to say that other marker brands aren't great quality and that they shouldn't be looked at for different reasons. So I just kind of wanted to insert that little disclaimer that just because I primarily work with Copic markers, I'm not necessarily trying to find a replacement for Copic markers. However, I do like to review certain marker brands to give beginners an opportunity to buy something that's a little bit less expensive, just to find out if they like working with markers in general. But of course, lots of markers are different for lots of different reasons. Anyway, I've also reviewed the Concept dual tip markers here on my channel, and I will insert a card so you can go watch that as well if you are interested. Those are also dual-ended alcohol-based markers. So if you are into Copic markers or the markers I'm going to be reviewing today, then that video will probably also be right up your alley. But let's get into the art supply that we are going to be talking about in this video, and that is the Ohuhu markers. I think I'm saying that right. I'm probably not, but I've been calling these Ohuhu markers. I'm not sure if that's way off base or even kind of close, but that's what I've been calling them, and that's what I'm going to call them for the duration of the video. So if I am saying it wrong, sorry. But I ordered these markers on Amazon and I got a set of 40 for $19.99. Now I'm looking at the Amazon page right now and it does say that the original list price is $40, but I also feel like I always see them available half off. So I feel like it's one of those things where they say the original price is $40, but it's always on sale for $20, so it's like the price is really $20 or $19.99. So I feel like it's just one of those sale tactics that companies do a lot. So yeah, I will read you the full title of these markers, and it's a mouthful, so get ready. These are officially called Ohuhu 40 Colors Dual Tip Art Sketch Twin Permanent Marker Pens Highlighters with Carrying Case for drawing, coloring, highlighting, and underlining. So there's a lot happening in that title. It kind of reminds me of the titles of a lot of items on like the Wish app, where they just try and throw in all of the keywords possible so that more people can find their product. However, it can be a little bit misleading because they have words like marker, pen, highlighter all in one sentence, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, is it a marker or a pen or a highlighter? You know, it's kind of hard to imagine one product being all three. And just looking a little bit more closely, you can purchase these in a set of 40, 60, or 80. However, it isn't exactly clear whether you get 40 colors, 60 different colors, or 80 different colors. I feel like there's going to be some overlap, and I can't even find anything that clearly states that you are getting different colors on top of the original 40. Like, I don't know if you get the set of 80 if you're just getting 2 of each of the same colors, if that makes sense. But these are the markers, so let's go ahead and open them up and get reviewing. So the nice thing is that it does come with this little carrying case, and it has a little handle on the top, so it is nice for travel. It's not a hard case though, so if you're going to be like throwing this in your suitcase and the TSA is going to be playing rugby with it, then maybe it's not that durable, but for general travel purposes, it's a nice little case. And here's a look at all of the colors that come in this set. Like I said, there are 40, and I have swatched these out, tested them, and then I've also demoed them, so you will see that throughout the video as well. So these are dual tipped markers, much like the other markers I reviewed here on my channel, such as Copic markers and Concept markers. You have a broad tip side, which just looks like the chisel tip from the Copic marker and Concept markers. And you have a fine tip, which is more like a bullet nib, which you find on a lot of different marker brands that are more inexpensive. Usually the brush tip markers tend to be pricier, and I guess that's just because they know the brush tip is more in demand. It's a larger nib and it's a little bit more complicated to create the texture and flexibility of a good brush nib, whereas a bullet nib is pretty standard, and I think that that's why it's easier to make it for more inexpensive markers. So yeah, there are 2 tips, and I kind of just wanted to point that out for those of you who are only looking for a brush nib. This is not something that's going to be for you. So I kind of just want to break down some of the initial pros and cons that I've noticed about these markers before we get into the real nitty-gritty of like how it works. And I'm going to do the cons first. The most obvious thing to me was that the Ohuhu markers are not refillable. So you cannot buy refills for these markers, and when they run out, you would theoretically have to buy a new marker. And I'm not sure if you can buy them individually. If I find that information, I will write it on the screen or I will write it down below. But that would be kind of a bummer because as far as I know, they're only available online. Next, obviously, the lack of a brush nib is a downside for me because, like I said, I typically use Copics. But that being said, these are a lot cheaper than Copics, so the lack of a brush nib is sort of forgivable. The other thing was that the coating system on these markers literally makes no sense. And you'll see that a little bit more in these swatches, but just to give you sort of a rough idea, for example, you have this color. So you can see this color here is called BG9 Blue Gray. That seems sort of like a similar color coding system to Copic markers until you get to one like this, which is just called 175 Lime Green. And it just seems like there's not a whole lot of consistency in this coding system, and while some colors side by side kind of make sense, like, oh, okay, this color is slightly lighter and this color is slightly darker, so those numbers sort of correspond, there's also just numbers that just don't really add up at all. So I would not use the coding system of these markers to navigate the colors because it doesn't really seem to make any sort of sense or give you any sort of idea about how the different colors correspond with each other like the Copic marker coding system does. So just another note. One thing too is that they are kind of hard to open. Mostly like when I was actually coloring with them, I found that just like it was a little bit annoying because the caps like really stick on and then you really have to like stick them back in. This is just like a little note. Obviously it's not that big of a deal, but I did run into a similar issue with the concept markers, and that kind of just reminded me like, ugh, you have to like really work to like get them open and close. And when you're opening and closing lots of different marker caps, it can just kind of get annoying. And then the last thing is that the color on the cap is not exact to the color of the ink. And this is a common problem across the board. Even Copic markers are guilty of this, so it's just something in general to be aware of. Just because the color looks like this on the cap does not mean that that's what the color looks like in the barrel or when you put it on paper. Different colors can also vary depending on which paper type you use, so they might look different based on other factors as well. But I just definitely noticed that the caps were not particularly reliable. Now, some positive things about these markers that I think I should definitely talk about is that the barrel shape is really nice. It feels a lot like the Copic marker barrels, although the shape of the caps are slightly different, but it's just like oval shaped enough that it won't roll off your desk if your desk is like slightly slanted, which is nice because it just prevents them from rolling everywhere and making a mess. So I do really like the shape and the size and the weight of the barrels. I do think that they feel really, really nice. They don't feel cheap or anything like that. And then the next biggest plus side for me was that they don't smell terrible. That was my biggest complaint with the concept markers, is that I got a headache after like 10 minutes of using them. These remind me smell-wise about as much as my Copic markers do. Like you can definitely smell like alcohol-based ink, but it's not as strong as like a Sharpie marker and definitely not as strong as the concept markers. So for me, that was actually a huge plus. So now I want to get into the swatches and kind of talk with you guys a little bit about how the different colors swatched out on the paper that I was using. And just a note for the paper that I used a recycled Bristol board. Alright guys, and here we have the 40 swatches of the 40 markers. I did go ahead and label them based on the coding number that was on the cap, but like I said, that really doesn't make much sense. There are a few instances like WG1 I can obviously infer is warm gray 1 and warm gray 4 is WG4, and obviously WG4 is darker than WG1, so that's pretty intuitive. But once you get into the actual colors, the numbers don't really seem to make sense, and then you have this weird combination of sometimes you have these color like indicators before the numbers and then sometimes you don't. So I don't know, that was kind of interesting to me and a little bit confusing as well, but for the most part I guess you don't really need a solid color system, especially if you do swatch out your markers like this. Then you don't really need a color system because you have a pretty clear idea of what you have in your collection anyway. So I'm going to zoom you in a little bit and just kind of go through this in a little bit more detail and which things kind of stood out to me the most. One thing, I'm really happy that this color set does come with some good grays. I like that they give you warm grays and cool grays. I like that they give you a lighter and a darker one. One thing that with this black that I don't know, it doesn't seem like a very true, rich, deep black. It almost just seems like more like a darker gray. Like it almost seems like I could shade C6 or CG6 with this black and it wouldn't seem like that much of a contrast. I don't know, it shows up more in person. On camera it does look a little bit deeper, but in person this black I feel like left a little bit to be desired. As far as earth tones go, I was pretty happy. I feel like the same thing, you have a lot of variety and a lot of different undertones for each of these reds. You know, this one is really kind of yellowy beige, this one's a little bit more yellowy green, and then these two are a little bit more like red rich browns, which I think is cool. Obviously, if given the choice, I would prefer a few more earth tones, but I also feel like some of these other colors were muted enough that I could use them with the earth tones, particularly this 42 green shade and this 33 yellow shade. This one shade as well, but it is a little bit too dark to really blend very well with any of the other colors. The blues, I feel like they give you a really good variety of blues, and this color in particular, BG9, I feel like works really well along with the gray colors as well as the green colors. So it's a really nice color, and I feel like that desaturated tone gives you a lot of variety. But even on top of that, just the light blues, I feel like they give you a lot of options. They give you more of these blue-green colors. They just, I don't know, I feel like they did a good job selecting a set of blues that really go well together but are also distinct enough. And I like that they have a good range of light and dark. They also gave you a lot of greens in this set, and I liked that for the most part. I feel like this is a good variety. I feel like these two go really well together. These two go really well together. Like I said, this one's really desaturated and I like that a lot. And this one is more on the blue side. I mean, I feel like this color 65 and this color 50 are very similar, and there's definitely a slight difference. Obviously this one is slightly more green, but I don't know if I really need both of these colors in this set. And then we have this color 124, which is I think the marker that I was most disappointed by in this set, and that is this fluorescent green color. And this is where I want to bring up a point that there are two different types of markers in this set. And up until now, all of the ones that I've talked about here have been alcohol based. But there are three markers in this set, this 124, 123, and 122, that are not alcohol based. And the reason you can tell, one reason, is that they don't bleed through. So you can see the oranges here. I have two oranges. Only one bleeds through on the back, and that's because only one of them is alcohol based, and that is this 23 color. This 122 is a highlighter, and that same goes for 123 and 124. And I'm not really sure why they felt the need to throw these in here. I know that in the description online they did mention that these were marker pen highlighters for drawing, coloring, highlighting, and underlining. So it seems like maybe they were trying to appeal to two different audiences. They were maybe trying to appeal to both artists and then students, or people, you know, who like to use markers in their planner or for journaling. But really for most journals, alcohol markers just don't really make a whole lot of sense because they're going to be too heavy and probably bleed through the paper. So it was kind of weird to me that they combined these two types of markers in this set. And the highlighters are like really weird. They basically destroy the paper after 2 swipes, and I show you that a little bit more in the testing phase, so you'll see. But I don't like the highlighters, and I just have to say that because I feel like they could have been better off leaving these out of the set and maybe including a few more earth tones, oranges, and reds, because these are the ones that I feel like they skimped out on the most. And I really feel like we could have used a more true red or one that was slightly lighter than this color, definitely another orange, you know, but everywhere else I feel like they gave us a good variety. But I feel like we didn't need these. These highlighters are just so-so. And I wanted to mention that just because I feel like this is the biggest setback of this set, and yeah, so definitely worth noting. We will address this a little bit more in the testing phase. The yellows, I really feel like they gave us 3 that go really well together if you wanted to create a good gradient. They basically gave you all of the colors that you would need, and if you wanted to deepen up this gradient, you could either opt for adding in this orange or even adding in these earth tones. So I really like the color variety they gave us here. Again, this 123 color is a highlighter, although it was not as weird as this 124, and I think you can even see this 123 color is very fluorescent and more like a traditional highlighter. This green, fluorescent green color almost looks like the exact same color, only it ate away at the paper a lot more and the color looked a lot muddier. The orange, my really only complaint with that is that they only really give you 1 orange, and then again, these highlighters are just not my favorite. The orange one in particular though was kind of streaky. The reds, like I kind of already prefaced, my biggest complaint is that you only have 2, and you have one that's like kind of a more mauve-y red, and then one that's like a deep wine. And I couldn't really use these to blend with each other, and I don't know, I feel like I could have used a more true red and then something in between. The pinks I actually really liked. I like that they give you these 2 light pinks, one that's a little more cool toned, and then one that's just like a little bit more peachy because this goes really nicely with skin tones. I love this rosy pink, and then this vivid pink. Originally, when I saw it in the marker form, I thought this was going to be another highlighter, and I'm really glad that it wasn't, because I was already realizing that I was not a fan of the highlighters in this set. So I feel like that this pink is just really nice. Same thing with the purples. I love the variety of purples that they gave us because I love these 2 lighter ones. I think these are really nice for shading skin tones actually. And I did have one issue with this, I believe it was the 81 marker, but when I was swatching it, it like had some serious ink overflow. Yeah, it was this one, because you can see down here the marker ink kind of flowed out. I mean, literally I was holding it up to the camera like this and marker ink was spilling out, and I think I even caught that on camera, so I'll insert that footage. But that was something that was kind of interesting, although that was the only marker that had that issue out of all 40, so I don't know. I'm glad I didn't sabotage the swatches or the picture in any way, but that was something to be wary of. If you order these markers, definitely check to make sure you don't have that issue with any of your markers. And I feel like this 83 really kind of grayish purple is pretty too, and that would also probably go well with blending with some of these grays. And then I love this 85 color because I feel like this kind of supplemented the lack of variety with the reds, because I feel like I could work with these 2 and then this color blended better with this color than these 2 blended together. So that was sort of my solution with the reds, was to pull in this plummy purple here. So now we've seen the swatches, that's all well and good. Like I've mentioned, I swatched this on some Bristol board, and one thing that I did notice was just that there was a little bit of bleeding on this paper, a little bit more than I would have liked. The edges seemed a little bit fuzzy, but I knew that I really couldn't make any final thoughts without doing any testing, so I wanted to talk about that next. So just like I did with the concept marker review, I wanted to put these markers to the test in a few different ways by testing their capabilities in different situations. And the first one that I did was blending. I wanted to see if these markers could blend well enough with each other to actually be used for a full illustration. And I found that for the most part here, they blended pretty well. You know, I definitely feel like they had to be close enough in color to really make sense. And I didn't really push it that far here because I was nervous, honestly. I wasn't really sure what to make of these markers after the swatches, and I was actually impressed that they were able to blend this well, but like I said, these were colors already in the set that I felt like I knew were gonna blend well. Like I mentioned, I feel like these yellows were kind of built to create this gradient, and then same thing with these warm grays. So I'll be honest, I didn't really push the blending very far here, but you can see that yes, you are able to get a blend with a lot of the colors. Don't mind this splotch here, we'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted to show you guys the layering capabilities of these markers, and for that I used 175, which was just kind of this nice, I believe it's called lime green shade, and I thought that this was really neat. You actually were able to get a good variety of color after layering it, and just so you know, I layered the colors by putting down one layer, letting it dry completely, and then putting down a second layer. One thing to note though is that this paper that I switched to now is a cardstock, and it's a pretty thin cardstock, and I did notice that if I layered the ink on, it sort of warped the paper, and that did sort of happen here. You can see the edges of the paper are lifted off the desk, and that's just because the paper did warp a little bit, and that's not usually something that you see with markers, but that did happen with these. So if you do a lot of layering, work with a heavier paper. The next demonstration here, I wanted to demonstrate the two tips, especially because in the swatches I really only focused on the chisel tip, but I didn't really feel like there was much difference in the variety of lines you could get between the fine tip and the broad tip. As you can see down here, I was able to get pretty thin lines with the broad tip, and I just feel like, yes, the fine tip is nice because you do have more control, but you still don't really get fine details. I just find that the biggest advantage that you have with a brush tip is that you just have a little bit more control in really fine areas. And the fine tip, it's just not flexible enough to give you those details. So you can see the finest line that I was able to get with the broad tip is not that much different than the finest line that I was able to get with the fine tip. But I do feel like both of the nibs, quality-wise, are pretty nice. The next test is probably something you guys are going to be most interested in, and that was how the marker ink held up to different inking mediums. And this is interesting. I'm actually going to zoom you in a little bit more for this, because I did test out both of the ink types, meaning I tested out the alcohol markers and then the highlighters as well. And you can see I tested this with my Sakura Micron pens, my Staedtler Tri Plus fine liners, just a regular ballpoint pen, a Col-Erase colored pencil where I didn't lift off any of the colored pencil like I normally do in sketching, a gel pen, a Sharpie, and my Pentel Pocket brush pen. And virtually all of these smudged except for the Sharpie, which is interesting because Sharpies, I just use like my fine Sharpie pen. They look like this. I use these mostly for school, actually. I never use these in my artwork. But if you were going to do line art before coloring, you might want to get one of these because that was the only one that actually stood up. And it actually still smudged a little bit with the highlighter. But yeah, virtually every inking medium that I put down smudged in some way. Now I was surprised how much the Micron smudged, usually because I don't have any problems with those smearing with alcohol-based markers. The Tri Plus actually held up okay, and usually these do smudge when I use Copic marker with them. The ballpoint pen did okay, the Col-Erase did okay, the gel pen did pretty bad, especially with the highlighter. Like I said, the Sharpie, I think, won this challenge, and then the Pentel Pocket brush pen smeared. So yeah, this was the point where I really didn't think I was gonna like these markers, especially because they smudged with virtually everything. But that's also not that much of a problem for me because I usually don't ink my artwork until after I'm done coloring it. All right, and then we have durability, and I'm gonna keep you guys zoomed in here because this is where I really get to explain why I hate the highlighters so much. So basically what I did was I just took the highlighters and rubbed them across the paper a few times, and it didn't take very many passes for it to actually eat away at the paper. I mean, this is like the surface of the paper being destroyed. And that happened with virtually all of them, although mostly with this 124 shade. I mean, it just, there's a texture here, like that's smooth, that's rough. Like it's, and all of them did that. 123 was the least likely to destroy the paper, but they all did. I mean, I had like chunks of the paper like coming off and like balling up, and it was just, I was very disappointed in that. And like I said, I feel like the set would be greatly improved if these weren't in it. They may seem kind of harsh, but that is just honestly how I feel. And another note was like, you kind of have to let the ink set into the paper for a minute. This goes for especially the highlighters, but even the alcohol-based ink, because it doesn't absorb into the paper completely right away. And so if you want to avoid smudging or getting the ink like on the side of your hand, you do just kind of have to wait a second. Yeah, you can see there's just like still bits of paper balling off here, and that's so annoying. But the final test I did was with the colorless blender and with some regular old rubbing alcohol. I basically just put a swatch down just to see how it would react with the colorless blender, and it reacted differently than I expected because it wasn't as controlled as using the Copic colorless blender with other Copic markers, which I guess kind of makes sense. But I don't know, I just feel like it separated the ink differently. Like it almost, like you can even see with the rubbing alcohol, it separated this red color into like hot pink and peach. And then still, the original swatch was just not that affected. So I would not recommend using a colorless blender or rubbing alcohol with these markers. So now that we've kind of tested the performance of these markers in a few different scenarios, the only way that we can really be sure if these markers are good or not is to actually color with them. So I'm going to get into the demonstration portion of this video and cut to a voiceover, and then I will be back at the end with my final thoughts. Alright guys, and now we are in the coloring phase of this video. I thank you guys so much for bearing with me. I know my product reviews tend to be really lengthy and sort of jam-packed full of information, so if you are still watching this video, thank you, I appreciate it, and give it a thumbs up. Let me know that you made it this far into the video. So you can see we're starting with the skin, and my method of attack, if you will, for the skin was to put down the blush color and shadow color first. And like I mentioned, for the shadow color, I used this really pale purple color, and then I layered the skin tone over top. Now, one of my biggest complaints, and I think one of the biggest shortcomings that you guys will find if you ordered this set of markers, is that there isn't a lot of variety of skin tones, meaning you could really only create a skin tone with either a super warm reddish brown or sort of this pale yellowy peach color, which was a little bit too yellowy for my personal art style. I just find that it's a little bit oversaturated, but with the rest of the limited color palette, it didn't look too off. And then to shade and color the hair, I actually used a few different colors. I used some of the warm grays and some of the really desaturated greens to really tone down that kind of golden blonde color and just give it a more realistic sort of ashy blonde feel. And I really like the way that the hair turned out. And everything so far up until this point has blended really well. I just find that the colors layer on top of themselves really well, and everything kind of looks very smooth, and so really no complaints as far as how these markers work. My biggest thing is just that you can't really get into very fine details with the fine tipped side of the marker. It just sort of feathers out when you try and go too tiny with the details, and that's sort of my biggest complaint, and that you really can't get those natural flicking motions with this kind of nib, so getting that texture in the hair was sort of an added difficulty, but really at the end of it all, it wasn't so bad. And I do show you a clip of the finished illustration after I add in all of the final details in sort of my breakdown. But just to give you guys my overall thoughts, I actually thought these markers were super easy to work with. And I got to use a decent amount of them in this illustration, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. Let me know what you guys think, and if you thought, I don't know, do you think I did a good job? I think I did all right, especially considering the limited color palette. And here's the finished piece, guys. You can see I did add line art to it, and then I also added some metallic gold gel pen in the back. Really happy with the way this came out, and actually really impressed with the markers. Given how I felt at the beginning of the review, I really wasn't sure, but I'm happy with the way this turned out. I actually think it looks like something I would create with Copic markers, although I did have a few less colors that I would normally work with. I feel like I was able to pull through, and overall I'm happy with it. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and cut to my final thoughts now, but this concludes the demonstration portion. Now, my final thoughts were kind of different from the point where I swatched the markers to the point where I actually finished coloring the demonstration. And when I was doing the swatches, to be honest, I didn't think I was going to like these markers at all. I thought they were going to be too difficult to work with, and I didn't think that they were going to blend well. But when I actually started using them to color the illustration, I found that they blended fairly easily, and even the lack of a brush nib wasn't that much of a setback. And I'm actually so happy with the final piece that I created for this video that I'm going to make a second piece to kind of go along with it. And I'm going to be using the Ohuhu markers for that as well. So you can't really see it, can you? So you can barely see the sketch, but I already kind of have a sketch planned out that's going to kind of be like the partner piece to this one, and I'm really excited about that. So I think that's going to be a Friday video on my channel. So overall, my final thoughts on the Ohuhu markers is I think for the price, they're really good. Obviously, they're not as good as Copic markers, and I don't even really think they would compare to Prismacolor or Winsor & Newton, although to be fair, I have not tried Winsor & Newton markers at this point. I know a lot of people have requested that, but those are on the higher end, and the Ohuhu markers are obviously a lot cheaper. If you pay $19.99 for the 40 markers like I did, you're basically paying 50 cents a marker, and even if they are full price at $40 for 40 markers, you're only paying $1 per marker, which is crazy. So I love how inexpensive these are, and I think if you are just starting out and just getting into markers, or you think that markers are a medium that you want to try, I actually think that these would be really good, and I actually do recommend them. I think that the color variety was pretty good for the most part. You know, I mentioned that a little bit in the swatches, but all in all, I'm impressed with how much I liked them. I kind of surprised myself a little bit because just based on the swatches alone, there was a lot to be desired in my personal opinion. And then during the testing phase especially, I felt like they fell short in a lot of areas that were going to be important to me. But doing the swatches and doing the tests beforehand really gave me a good idea of what to avoid when working with the markers, like not to ink my piece first, and how to layer them and work with them a little bit better. So I'm really happy with the end result. I hope you guys found this review helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up and let me know what else you want me to review. Right now I have a couple of metallic watercolors that I would like to review, and then I have just a couple of other odds and ends and products here and there that I want to share with you guys and give you guys my thoughts on. So comment down below if you have any more ideas for this series, and I will see you guys Friday with an Artsy Fartsy Friday video. So I will see you guys then.